My name is João de Silva, and I was born and raised in São Paulo, Brazil, in the 90s. I've always been a curious kid, and I loved exploring the vibrant streets of my neighborhood. Whenever I had some free time, I would walk along the bustling Avenida Paulista, admiring the modern skyscrapers and the diverse crowds of people from all over the world. As I grew up, I developed a fascination for the city's history and culture. I would spend my weekends visiting museums and art galleries, or listening to live music in the bohemian neighborhood of Vila Madalena. My parents, Maria and Carlos de Silva, were hard-working people who owned a small bakery in the neighborhood of Pinheiros. They always encouraged me to pursue my dreams and instilled in me the value of education. One day, while walking along Rua Augusta, I met a group of young musicians who were playing samba on the street. I struck up a conversation with them and soon became friends with the group's leader, Rafael. Rafael was a charismatic young man with a passion for music. He worked as a waiter at a nearby cafe and played in a local band on the weekends. I was fascinated by Rafael's carefree attitude and his love for life. We walked along the streets of São Paulo, and Rafael introduced me to other musicians and artists in the city. We visited the iconic municipal theatre, the colourful street art of Beco do Batman, and the trendy bars and restaurants of Vila Madalena. I also met other young people who were pursuing their dreams in the city, like Julia, a fashion designer who worked in a small boutique in Pinheiros, and Marcelo, a computer programmer who was building a startup in the neighborhood of Itaim Bibi. Despite the excitement and energy of the city, I found myself feeling lost and uncertain about my future. I had just turned 21 and was not sure what I wanted to do with my life. One day, as I was walking along the banks of the Tietê River, I met an old man who was fishing. He asked me what was troubling me, and I poured out my heart, telling him about my fears and doubts. The old man listened patiently and then said, "Meu filho, a vida, it's a journey. And sometimes we don't know where we're going. But if we keep walking and exploring, we'll eventually find our way. Trust yourself, follow your heart, and never give up on your dreams." I felt a sense of peace wash over me as I thanked the old man and walked away. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I would keep exploring, keep learning, and keep dreaming. After all, I was a son of São Paulo, and the city was full of endless possibilities. Rafael looked at me and said, "Hey João, are you okay? Looks like there's something bothering you." "Hi Rafael, I'm just feeling a little lost lately. I don't know what I want to do with my life." Then Rafael says, "I understand you. Life can be unknown at times, but you're young and you have all the time in the world to find out what really makes you happy. The important thing is to trust your instincts and follow your heart. Embrace the journey ahead, knowing that even amidst uncertainty, every step you take brings you closer to discovering your true passion and purpose." One sunny day, Rafael and I met a group of girls at the beach. There was Ana, Paula and Camila. They were all from the neighborhood of Capão Redondo, and they were eager to show us around their part of the city. We spent the day exploring the streets of Capão Redondo, stopping at local bars and restaurants and listening to live music. As the sun began to set, Ana suggested that we go to a rave that was happening that night in one of the favelas nearby. I was hesitant at first, but Rafael convinced me to go. "Vamos lá, João? It's a unique experience," he said. We arrived at the favela just as the party was getting started. The music was loud and the air was thick with smoke from the barbecues and the weed being passed around. We danced and drank and laughed with our new friends, feeling alive and free. But then, just as the party was reaching its peak, we heard gunshots in the distance. At first, we thought it was just the sound of fireworks, but then we saw people running and screaming. Suddenly, we were caught in the middle of an intense gunfight between drug dealers and the Bataillon de Operações Policiais Especiais, B.O.P.E. The streets were filled with smoke and chaos, and we could hear the sound of bullets whizzing past our heads. We ran as fast as we could, trying to find a way out of the favela. We could hear the sound of police sirens and the screams of the people around us. It felt like we were in a war zone. As we turned a corner, we saw a group of B.O.P.E. officers coming towards us. They were heavily armed and looked like they meant business. We didn't know what to do, but then Paula suggested that we hide in a nearby house. We ran into the house, and Paula banged on the door, shouting in Portuguese for the owner to let us in. The owner, a woman named Maria, opened the door and let us in. We huddled together in the living room, praying that we would be safe. The sound of gunfire was getting louder, and we could hear people shouting in the streets. After what felt like an eternity, the gunfight began to die down. We could hear the sound of police radios and the distant sound of sirens. We waited for a few more minutes, just to be sure that it was safe to leave. When we finally emerged from the house, the streets were empty and quiet. The buildings were riddled with bullet holes, and there was debris scattered everywhere. We walked back to Capão Redondo in silence, our hearts pounding with fear and adrenaline. We were lucky to have made it out alive. As we said goodbye to Ana, Paula, and Camila, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the experience. It was a stark reminder of the realities of life in São Paulo, and it made me appreciate the beauty and the danger of the city in equal measure. I had never felt so driven in my life. I spent every waking moment working out, building up my strength and endurance, determined to become fit enough to join the Bataillon de Operações Policiais Especiais, B.O.P.E. As I trained, I constantly thought about the elite police force and their daring missions to take down dangerous criminals. One day, as I was eating lunch at a local cafe, I overheard a group of men talking about B.O.P.E. They spoke in hushed tones, as if they were discussing something secret and forbidden. My curiosity was piqued, and I approached the men to ask them about B.O.P.E. "Excuse me, señores," I said. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. What is this B.O.P.E.? What are you talking about?" The men looked at me with suspicion. "Who are you?" one of them asked. "I'm just a curious citizen," I replied. "I've been hearing a lot about B.O.P.E. lately and would like to know more about it." The men exchanged glances before one of them spoke up. "B.O.P.E. é o Batalhão de Operações Policiais Especiais, Special Police Operations Battalion," he said. "It's an elite police force that operates in Rio de Janeiro. They're known for their tough training regimen and their fearless approach to taking down criminals." My eyes widened in excitement. "That sounds amazing," I said. "How do I join?" The men looked at me skeptically. "It's not easy, senor," one of them said. "B.O.P.E. only accepts the best of the best. You'll need to be in top physical shape, and you'll have to pass a grueling selection process." I nodded, undeterred. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes," I said. The men looked at each other before one of them spoke up. "If you are really interested in joining B.O.P.E., there is someone you need to meet," he said. "His name is Marcos, and he was once a member of the force. He can tell you everything you need to know." The men gave me an address and told me to meet Marcos there at midnight. "Thank you," I said. I had been looking forward to my training at B.O.P.E for months. I knew it would be grueling, but I was determined to succeed. On my first day, I was assigned to a team and introduced to my fellow officers. "Hola, I am João de Silva. Nice to meet you all," I said, greeting the team with a smile. "Welcome, João. I'm Captain Alves. We're glad to have you here," replied the team leader in Portuguese. My training was intense, but I pushed myself to the limit. I learned to shoot accurately, disarm bombs, and rappel down buildings. I even survived the dreaded caveira training, where I was subjected to sleep deprivation and physical exhaustion. On my last day of training, I was excited to put my new skills to the test in a live mission. The team was sent to a favela to apprehend a notorious drug lord. I was nervous, but determined. As we made our way through the narrow streets, I heard gunfire in the distance. "What's going on, Capitano?" I asked. "We're not sure, but we need to stay alert," replied Captain Alves. Suddenly, one of my best friends, Fabio, stepped on a landmine. I froze in shock. "João, help me!" cried Fabio, writhing in pain. My training kicked in and I ran to Fabio's side. "Fique calmo, meu amigo. I'll get you out of here," I said, trying to calm him down. "Careful, João. We need to defuse the mine before we can move him," warned Captain Alves. I nodded, and the team worked quickly to defuse the mine. It was a tense few minutes, but we managed to do it. "Okay, let's move him to safety," said Captain Alves. I and the team carefully lifted Fabio onto a stretcher and carried him to safety. We called for a helicopter to transport him to the hospital. As we waited for the helicopter, I held Fabio's hand. "Hang in there, meu amigo. You're going to be okay," I said. "Thank you, João. You saved my life," replied Fabio weakly. I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. I had trained hard for this moment, and I had saved a life. I knew I had made the right choice in joining B.O.P.E. As a B.O.P.E. operator, I lived for the thrill of the mission. But as I went on more and more dangerous missions, I started to develop strange symptoms. Sometimes I felt like I was invincible, but other times I felt like nothing mattered. I had trouble sleeping and eating, and I found myself becoming increasingly irritable with my teammates. One day, my team was sent to the Complexo do Alemão to capture a drug lord. The mission was intense, and I felt a rush of adrenaline as we chased after the target. But as the hours wore on, I began to feel restless and agitated. "João, you okay?" asked Miguel, one of my teammates. "I'm fine. Let's just finish this and get out of here," I replied, trying to push aside my feelings. But my symptoms only got worse. I had trouble concentrating, and I found myself becoming increasingly reckless in my work. I would take unnecessary risks and push myself beyond my limits. After the mission was over, I returned to my barracks feeling exhausted and drained. But instead of seeking help, I chose to ignore my symptoms. As the weeks went on, my symptoms persisted. I started to feel like I was on a roller coaster with extreme highs and lows. Sometimes I felt like I could take on the world, but other times I felt like I was drowning. One day my friend Paulo noticed that something was wrong. "João, you've been acting weird lately. Is everything okay?" asked Paulo. "I'm fine, just a little tired, that's all," I replied, trying to brush off his concerns. But Paulo persisted. "No, something isn't right. You need to talk to someone." I knew he was right, but I was too proud to admit that I needed help. I thought I could handle it on my own, so I continued to ignore my symptoms, even as they worsened. I started to have panic attacks, and I had trouble controlling my emotions. Eventually, my recklessness caught up with me. During a mission, I took a risk that I shouldn't have, and I ended up getting myself and my teammates in danger. I had just finished a long day at the Bataillon de Opérations Policières Especiales headquarters. It was a tough day, and I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that hung heavily on my heart. I had accidentally shot a civilian during a B.O.P.E. operation, and I knew I had made a mistake. As I walked out of the station, my colleagues invited me out to a new bar they had heard of. I hesitated at first, but I knew I needed to take my mind off of what had happened earlier. As we entered Bar d'Osé, the neon sign flickered, but the atmosphere was lively. The bartender, Paulo, greeted us warmly, and we took a seat at the bar. It wasn't long before I noticed a woman sitting at a table by the window. She was stunning, with long, curly brown hair and deep brown eyes that seemed to sparkle in the dim light of the bar. I couldn't resist approaching her. "Hi, my name is João. Can I buy you a drink?" I asked. She smiled and replied, "Sure, my name is Isabella. Nice to meet you." We spoke in a mix of Portuguese and English, as Isabella was originally from the United States, but had been living in Sao Paulo for a few years. As we talked, I found myself drawn to her more and more. There was something about her that made me forget about everything else that was happening in my life. After a few drinks, I suggested we take a walk on the beach. Isabella agreed, and we made our way to Avenida Atlântica. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore filled the air as we walked hand in hand. The night was warm, and the moon was bright, casting a soft light on the sand. We eventually found ourselves at a secluded spot on the beach, away from the crowds. As we sat down on the sand, I couldn't resist the urge to kiss Isabella. "Posso te beijar?" I asked in Portuguese. Our lips met in a fiery embrace, and I felt a surge of electricity run through my body. We were lost in each other, our bodies moving together in perfect harmony. The feeling of the warm sand against our skin only added to the intensity of the moment. We were completely consumed by each other, and nothing else seemed to matter. Our clothes soon came off, and we made love under the stars. The feeling of her body against mine was incredible, and I couldn't get enough of her. We moved together in a passionate dance, our bodies locked in a heated embrace. I was lost in the moment, completely consumed by the pleasure that we were sharing. As we lay on the beach, panting and sweating, I knew that I had found something special in Isabella. We spent the rest of the night talking and laughing, enjoying each other's company until the sun began to rise. It was a night that I would never forget, a moment of passion and connection that I desperately needed after the events of the day. As I walked home, I couldn't help but smile, knowing that I had found something worth fighting for. As I drove down Avenida Atlântica, I couldn't stop thinking about Isabella. Her long dark hair and sparkling green eyes had captured my attention all night. But my thoughts were interrupted as I received a call from my captain. "João, you've been summoned to the B.O.P.E. headquarters immediately. We need to discuss the events that took place at the bank. This is serious," said the captain. I sighed heavily and replied, "Yes, sir. I understand, and I'll be there as soon as possible." As I made my way to the headquarters, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. I knew I had messed up, and now I was facing the consequences. When I arrived, I was met by my captain and a few other officers. "João, we are temporarily suspending you from work while we investigate the incident," my captain said sternly in Portuguese. I hung my head in shame and replied, "I understand, sir." With the weight of despair pressing upon my weary shoulders, I stepped out of the headquarters, the door closing behind me like a final echo of shattered dreams. The world seemed to blur into a desolate landscape, mirroring the turmoil within my soul. Lost and adrift, I stood on the precipice of uncertainty, teetering between darkness and redemption. In a desperate attempt to numb the pain, I sought solace in the vices that beckoned from the shadows. My trembling hands reached out to grasp the familiar crutches of self-destruction, a pack of cigarettes and a bottle of liquid oblivion. As the toxic haze enveloped me, I descended further into the abyss, my mind clouded with bitter regrets and the haunting echoes of shattered promises. With reckless abandon, I slid behind the wheel, my vision obscured by tears of anguish. The night became a frenzied blur as the wailing sirens of the law echoed behind me, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow upon the chaos I had become. The streets transformed into a treacherous labyrinth as I careened through the darkness, desperately weaving between the oncoming headlights, narrowly escaping catastrophic collisions that loomed at every turn. Finally, driven by an instinct I couldn't comprehend, I arrived at a desolate outpost, a small airport nestled amidst the haunting tranquility of the countryside. The flickering lights above the runway seemed like beacons of hope, beckoning me towards an uncertain future. With my heart pounding in my chest, I stepped out of the car, the scent of desperation clinging to my every breath. Little did I know that this haphazard escape would become the catalyst for an extraordinary journey of self-discovery, propelling me towards a destiny I never could have imagined. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I locked my gaze on the helicopter perched on the tarmac, its powerful rotors casting an ominous silhouette against the darkened sky. Ignoring the whisper of caution that echoed in my mind, I made a fateful decision, an audacity born from desperation and an unwavering desire for liberation. I approached the cockpit, my heart pounding in sync with the throbbing blades above. The memory of past flights surged within me, a flickering beacon of reckless confidence. Ignoring the absence of proper licensing, I strapped myself in, my trembling hands gripping the controls with a mix of trepidation and sheer determination. As the helicopter roared to life, the world became a blur of swirling lights and deafening engine noise. The ground beneath me trembled in awe as I defied gravity's grasp, soaring into the inky abyss. Thoughts of Isabella, her face etched with a bittersweet longing, raced through my mind, intertwining with visions of an uncertain future. The wind whipped against my face, an exhilarating torrent that drowned out doubts and silenced the voices of reason. Flying recklessly, I carved a path over the majestic coastline, the rhythmic symphony of crashing waves becoming the soundtrack to my audacious rebellion. The sheer exhilaration of each daring maneuver drowned out the weight of consequences, leaving behind a world that no longer mattered. In those fleeting moments, I was free. Free from the shackles of my past, free from the burden of responsibilities. All I knew was that I needed to keep flying.